The rhythmic clatter of Sarah's antique Underwood typewriter usually soothed her, each keystroke a tiny anchor in the sea of her day. But today, the sound was a mocking echo of her former productivity. She stared at the half-typed sentence, a critique of a newly acquired Goya etching, now utterly irrelevant. Yesterday, Sarah Chun, 38, meticulous, respected, and slightly feared curator of European art at the City Museum, had been on the cusp of publishing her monograph. Today, she was unemployed. It had happened with the sudden, brutal efficiency of a guillotine. A field trip of fifth graders, a moment of chaos near the Knights in Armor exhibit. 10-year-old Jamie Miller, a whirlwind of untied shoelaces and insatiable curiosity, had ducked under a velvet rope, mesmerized by a particularly gleaming suit of 16th century Maximilian armor. What no one but Sarah, with her hawk-like curator's eye, had noticed was the subtle wobble in the pedestal, a result of recent floor repolishing and a temporary, less than secure bracing. As Jamie leaned in, a collective gasp went unheard by him. The massive, steel-clad mannequin began its slow, inexorable tilt. Sarah didn't think, she moved. She launched herself forward, a blur of sensible tweed and sudden athleticism, shoving Jamie clear with a force that sent him sprawling safely onto the carpet. She, however, took the brunt of the impact as the armor crashed down, its gauntlet fist grazing her shoulder, the rest of it missing her by inches, but demolishing a priceless Ming Dynasty vase on an adjacent display that she'd inadvertently backed into. The boy was fine, a little tearful, a lot bewildered. Sarah had a bruised shoulder and a throbbing headache. The museum director, Mr. Abernathy, a man whose veins seemed to run with chilled formaldehyde rather than blood, had been less concerned with her heroism. "You violated protocol, Ms. Chun," he'd intoned, his voice devoid of warmth, later in his mahogany-paneled office. "Entering a restricted area, endangering yourself, and the catastrophic loss of the Lou collection vase. The boy's parents are, of course, relieved, but our insurers, our board." He'd trailed off, but the meaning was clear. "Your impulsiveness, while perhaps well-intentioned in this isolated instance, demonstrates a lack of judgment unsuited to the careful stewardship required in your role." No mention of the faulty pedestal, which she'd reported concerns about weeks ago. No acknowledgement that a child's life outweighed a vase, however valuable. By 5 p.m., Sarah was packing a box, the Goya forgotten, her career in tatters. She'd spent a sleepless night, vacillating between righteous anger, a profound sense of injustice, and a gnawing anxiety about the future. Now, the morning sun cast long shadows across her small, cluttered living room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a physical manifestation of her unsettled life. Her cat, a fluffy Persian named Rembrandt, twined around her ankles, oblivious to her existential crisis. "At least you still love me, Remy," she murmured, scratching him behind the ears. She made a pot of coffee, the aroma usually a comfort, now just another reminder of a routine shattered. What was she going to do? Update her resume? Call her few contacts in the art world, who would undoubtedly hear Abernathy's version of events first? It was then she heard it, a low, guttural thrumming, unfamiliar and deeply resonant. It grew rapidly, vibrating through the floorboards, rattling the cheap window panes of her modest bungalow. Rembrandt hissed, bolting under the sofa. Sarah frowned, coffee cup halfway to her lips. It sounded like helicopters, but not the sporadic news choppers or the distant medical flights she occasionally heard. This was close, very close, and there was more than one. She peered through her blinds. Her jaw dropped. Hovering with impossible precision just above the treetops of her small suburban street were 2 Black Hawk helicopters. Their dark, menacing silhouettes blotted out the morning sun, rotors churning the air into a furious downdraft that whipped leaves and loose debris into miniature cyclones. Neighbors were emerging from their homes, faces tilted upwards, a mixture of fear and awe in their expressions. This wasn't normal. This was military. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Had Abernathy somehow reported her for something else? Was destroying a priceless vase a federal offense if it was valuable enough? Her mind raced, conjuring ludicrous scenarios. The thrumming intensified. Then one of the Black Hawks began a slow, controlled descent, its landing gear extending. It wasn't aiming for the street, but for the small, patchy lawn of Mrs. Henderson's meticulously kept garden across the road. Sarah watched, aghast, as the powerful rotor wash flattened Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning petunias. Before it even fully settled, the side door slid open and figures began to disembark. Men in dark suits, sunglasses, earpieces. They moved with an unnerving, coordinated efficiency. Two of them, ignoring the gawking neighbors, strode directly towards her front door. Sarah's breath hitched. This was beyond anything she could comprehend. She fumbled with the deadbolt, her hands shaking. Were they here for her? Why? A sharp, authoritative knock. She took a deep breath, smoothed down her pajama top, a faded museum fundraiser tee, and opened the door. Two men stood there, impeccably dressed, their expressions unreadable. One was taller, broader, the other slightly older, with a stern set to his jaw. "Sarah Chun," the taller one asked, his voice polite but firm. "Yes." Her voice was a squeak. "Ma'am, we'd like you to come with us. There are some people who wish to speak with you." It wasn't a request. Speak with me? About what? Who are you? Panic was now a cold knot in her stomach. Is this about the museum? The vase? I can explain. The older man offered a thin smile. It's not about the vase, Ms. Chun. Not directly. Please, it would be best if you came quietly. We can explain en route. En route to where? She demanded, a spark of her usual defiance flickering. And why the dramatic entrance? You've flattened Mrs. Henderson's petunias. A flicker of something, amusement, crossed the taller man's face. Apologies for the petunias, ma'am. National security occasionally has horticultural casualties. As for where, let's just say it's a secure location. Her mind was a whirl. National security? This was insane. She thought of the boy, Jamie. Was he more than just a random fifth grader? There was no point resisting. These men weren't the type to take no for an answer. All right, she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. Let me just get my shoes and maybe a jacket. Of course, the older man said, stepping aside slightly. As she grabbed her sneakers and a light cardigan, her mind replayed the scene at the museum. Jamie Miller. He'd been a bright, inquisitive kid. His parents, she hadn't met them. They were probably just ordinary people, horrified by the near miss, grateful for her intervention. Weren't they? The short walk across the street felt like miles. The remaining Black Hawk hovered protectively overhead while the first one waited, its rotors still turning slowly. The men guided her towards it. As she ducked under the whirling blades, the noise and wind buffeted her, disorienting and overwhelming. Inside, the helicopter was surprisingly Spartan but functional. Strapped into a seat, she watched her little bungalow, her ordinary life, recede below. The flight was short, maybe 15 minutes. They landed on a large, impeccably manicured lawn surrounded by high, imposing walls topped with security wire. A sprawling, elegant mansion stood before them, more old money than government starkness. It looked like something out of a historical drama. She was escorted inside, through opulent hallways adorned with art that, even in her dazed state, she recognized as genuine masterpieces. Her curator's mind briefly cataloged a sergeant, a cassette. This was no ordinary government facility. They stopped before a pair of large oak doors. One of her escorts knocked, then opened it. "Ms. Chun is here, sir." She stepped into a vast, sun-drenched study. Books lined every wall, floor to ceiling. A huge mahogany desk dominated one end, and behind it, a man rose to greet her. He was tall, distinguished, with silver hair and eyes that held a keen intelligence and an undeniable authority. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, not military attire, but he carried himself with a commander's bearing. Beside him, a woman with kind eyes and a worried expression also stood. And next to her, fidgeting slightly, was Jamie Miller. Ms. Chun, the man said, his voice a warm baritone that filled the room. Thank you for coming. I am General Marcus Thorne, and this is my wife, Eleanor. He gestured to the woman, who offered a tremulous smile. And you've already met our grandson, Jamie. Sarah stared. General Thorne? She vaguely recognized the name. A highly respected, four-star general, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, if her memory served correctly. Jamie Miller was his grandson? The pieces clicked into place with dizzying speed. The Blackhawks, the men in suits, the national security comment. Jamie rushed forward. Ms. Chun, are you okay? My grandpa said you got fired cause of me and the statue. I told him it wasn't my fault it wobbled, and you were super brave. General Thorne chuckled, a surprisingly warm sound. He's been quite the advocate on your behalf, Ms. Chun. And he's right. You were incredibly brave. Eleanor Thorne stepped forward, her eyes glistening. We wanted to thank you, from the bottom of our hearts. You saved Jamie's life. That armor. I can't bear to think what might have happened. Her voice choked with emotion. Sarah felt a blush creep up her neck. I just did what anyone would have done. No, Ms. Chun, General Thorne said, his expression serious. Not everyone. Many would have hesitated. Many would have prioritized their own safety or museum policy. You prioritized a child. That speaks volumes about your character. He gestured to a comfortable leather armchair. Please sit. We have much to discuss. As Sarah sank into the chair, the general continued. We were, of course, appalled to hear about your dismissal. Mr. Abernathy, it seems, is a man who values porcelain above people. I took the liberty of making a few inquiries. It appears his tenure at the museum might be coming under review. A glint of steel in his eyes suggested Abernathy was in for a very bad day. But that's not why we brought you here, he went on. Your quick thinking, your courage under pressure, your eye for detail, noticing that unstable pedestal when no one else did. These are rare and valuable qualities. Eleanor added, in your integrity, Ms. Chun. To risk your career, your reputation, it's extraordinary. General Thorne leaned forward. Ms. Chun, what happened yesterday was unfortunate in its outcome for your previous employment, but it also brought your unique talents to my attention in a rather dramatic fashion. People with your blend of observational skill, decisiveness, and moral courage are not easy to find. He paused, letting his words sink in. I understand your expertise lies in art history and curation, but the principles underlying that work, meticulous research, preservation, understanding an object's context and significance, identifying vulnerabilities, are transferable. We have a department within the Defense Intelligence Agency, a rather unique one, that deals with the recovery and preservation of culturally significant artifacts in conflict zones. Sometimes these items are targets, sometimes they're simply at risk. It requires discretion, intellect, and a certain resilience. Sarah's mind, still reeling from the morning's events, struggled to keep up. The DI? Artifact recovery in war zones? It was a world away from Goya etchings and museum galas. It's a long way from curating European masters, I know, General Thorne said, as if reading her thoughts. But the current head of that unit is retiring. We need someone with a keen eye, an unwavering ethical compass, and the ability to act decisively. Someone who understands the profound value of history and heritage, and who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty, so to speak, to protect it. He looked directly at her. We believe that person could be you, Ms. Chun. We'd like to offer you the directorship of the Cultural Heritage Preservation Task Force. It would mean extensive training, travel to challenging environments, and considerable responsibility. But it would also mean making a profound difference, safeguarding history on a global scale. Sarah was speechless. One moment she was contemplating unemployment and despair. The next she was being offered a position that sounded like something out of an adventure novel by one of the most powerful men in the country. All because she'd saved a little boy from a falling suit of armor. Jamie, who had been listening intently, piped up, "It would be awesome, Ms. Chun. You could be like Indiana Jones, but for real." A smile finally broke through Sarah's shock. She looked at the hopeful faces of the Thorns, at Jamie's enthusiastic grin. The injustice of her firing still stung, but it was now overshadowed by this astonishing, improbable opportunity. The fear she'd felt when the Blackhawks appeared was replaced by a thrilling, if daunting, sense of possibility. "General Thorne, Mrs. Thorne," she began, her voice steadier now. I don't know what to say. This is overwhelming. Take your time to consider it, of course," the general said kindly. "But know this, what you did for Jamie, that instinct to protect, to preserve what is precious, is precisely what we're looking for." Sarah looked at her hands, then back at the general. The path her life had been on had been abruptly demolished. But in its place, a new, far more extraordinary one had just been revealed. She thought of the dusty archives, the quiet contemplation of her old job, and then contrasted it with the potential dynamism of this new role. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. "Mr. Abernathy said I was impulsive," she mused aloud, a wry smile playing on her lips. General Thorne's eyes twinkled. "Sometimes, Miss Chun, a little well-placed impulsiveness, guided by courage and intellect, is exactly what the world needs." She took a deep breath. The antique Underwood, the Goya etching, the petty tyranny of Mr. Abernathy, they all seemed very far away now. A new chapter was waiting, one she could never have imagined. "General," Sarah said, meeting his gaze with a newfound resolve, "where do I sign up?" Outside, the remaining Black Hawks still idled, a symbol not of menace, but of an unexpected, life-altering destiny. Mrs. Henderson's petunias might have been collateral damage, but for Sarah Chun, a far more significant bloom was just beginning.